The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty general store in Ukiah, California, and Yates Kincaid knew immediately that something was wrong with the woman inside. Through the grimy window, he could see her slumped against the wooden bench, her pale face pressed against the glass, eyes barely open. The September sun beat down mercilessly on the small mining town, and Yates had been waiting at the store for nearly 2 hours, his hat pulled low against the glare. He had expected to meet Hannah Ainsworth, the mail-order bride whose letters had been his only companion during the long winter months, but he had not expected this. The driver climbed down from his perch, shaking his head as he opened the door. "This one barely made it," he said gruffly. "Been sick since we left Sacramento. Tried to get her to stop and rest, but she insisted on continuing. Said someone was waiting for her." Yates stepped forward, his heart hammering in his chest. He was a tall man, lean and weathered from years of working cattle and mining claims in the California hills. His hands were calloused, his face lined from sun and wind, but his eyes were kind as he looked at the frail woman who was supposed to become his wife. "Miss Ainsworth," he said softly, reaching into the coach. Her eyes fluttered open, and despite her obvious illness, he saw they were a striking green, like the grass that grew near the creek after winter rains. She tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper emerged. "I am Hannah," she managed. "I am sorry. I did not want to arrive this way." "Do not apologize," Yates said firmly. He reached in and carefully lifted her from the coach. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, and he could feel the heat of fever radiating through her traveling dress. The fabric was damp with sweat, and her dark blonde hair hung in limp strands around her face. The driver handed down a worn carpetbag. "That is all she has. Good luck to you, friend. You will need it." Yates barely heard him. He was already carrying Hannah away from the curious stares of townsfolk, heading toward his small cabin at the edge of town. His ranch, if you could call it that, consisted of a modest house, a barn, and 20 acres where he ran a small herd of cattle. It was not much, but it was honest work, and he had hoped to share it with someone. "I have you," he murmured to Hannah as her head lolled against his shoulder. "You are safe now." The walk to his property took 15 minutes, and by the time he kicked open the door, Hannah had lost consciousness entirely. Yates laid her gently on his bed, the only bed in the single-room cabin, and immediately set about trying to cool her fever. He had nursed sick cattle through harsh winters, and tended his own wounds after more than one rough encounter with claim jumpers, but caring for a desperately ill woman was something entirely different. He fetched water from the well, cool and clean, and used it to dampen strips of cloth that he laid across her forehead. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, and when he carefully unbuttoned the high collar of her dress to help her breathe easier, he could see how thin she had become. Her collarbones jutted sharply beneath pale skin. "What happened to you?" he wondered aloud, though she could not hear him. As the afternoon wore on, Yates worked steadily. He removed her boots, which were worn through at the soles, and covered her with a light sheet. He mixed a tea from willow bark, something his mother had taught him years ago before she passed, and managed to get small sips between Hannah's cracked lips. He kept the cabin as cool as he could, opening windows to let in the evening breeze. When darkness fell, he lit a single lamp and sat beside the bed, watching her face. In their letters, Hannah had described herself as a seamstress from Boston, 22 years old, who had lost both her parents to typhoid fever. She had written of her desire for a fresh start, away from the crowded city and the painful memories. Her words had been intelligent and warm, and Yates, at 28 years old and lonely after 3 years of solitary living, had found himself looking forward to each letter with increasing anticipation. Now, looking at her gaunt face and hearing her labored breathing, he wondered if he would ever hear her voice speak the words she had written so beautifully. "You have to fight," he told her quietly. "I know you do not know me yet, but I am here. I will help you through this." The night was long. Hannah's fever spiked twice, sending her into fits of restless tossing. Yates changed the cool cloths repeatedly, held her steady when she thrashed, and forced more willow bark tea past her lips. By dawn, he was exhausted, but he refused to leave her side. The second day brought no improvement. If anything, Hannah seemed weaker. She occasionally opened her eyes, but they were glassy and unfocused. Yates knew he needed help beyond his limited knowledge. He saddled his horse and rode quickly into town to fetch Dr. Morrison, a gruff Scotsman who had been practicing medicine in Ukiah for nearly a decade. The doctor arrived within the hour, his black bag in hand and his expression skeptical. "Mail-order bride, I heard," he said as Yates led him to the bedside. "Risky business bringing in a complete stranger." "Just help her," Yates said, his jaw tight. Dr. Morrison examined Hannah thoroughly, checking her pulse, listening to her breathing and studying the pallor of her skin. Finally, he straightened and shook his head. "She has got pneumonia, likely contracted on the journey. The stage coach lines are notorious for illness. Packed in with other passengers, breathing bad air, no proper food or rest. She is severely malnourished as well. Has she been starving?" "I do not know," Yates admitted. "Her letters never mentioned any hardship. People often hide such things, especially women seeking marriage arrangements." The doctor pulled out several small bottles from his bag. "I can leave you medicine, but I will be honest with you, Kincaid. She is very weak. Whether she survives depends on how hard she fights and how well you care for her. She needs constant attention, nourishment if you can get her to take any, and rest. Do you have anyone who can help?" Yates thought of the few people he knew in town. Most kept to themselves, busy with their own claims and ranches. "I will manage," he said. "You will not sleep." "Then I will not sleep." Dr. Morrison studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. Give her this tonic 3 times daily. Try to get broth into her, anything with substance. Keep her cool if the fever spikes, warm if she gets chills, and pray if you are inclined." After the doctor left, Yates set about his new routine. He could not neglect his cattle entirely, so in the early morning he rode out to check on them, ensuring they had water and the fences were intact. He worked quickly, pushing himself to finish in half the usual time. Then he returned to Hannah's side. He cooked thin broths from beef bones and vegetables from his small garden, carefully spooning tiny amounts into her mouth and massaging her throat to encourage swallowing. He kept the cabin clean, washing the sheets when they became soaked with sweat. He read to her from the only books he owned, a worn Bible and a collection of poetry left behind by the previous owner of the cabin. He did not know if she could hear him, but he hoped his voice might reach her somehow, might give her a reason to hold on. On the third night, Hannah's fever broke. Yates woke from an uncomfortable doze in the chair beside the bed to find her sleeping peacefully, her breathing finally steady and deep. He pressed his hand to her forehead and nearly wept with relief. She was still warm, but the dangerous heat was gone. He allowed himself to hope. The next morning, Hannah's eyes opened, and for the first time they were clear and aware. She looked around the unfamiliar cabin, confusion evident on her face before her gaze settled on Yates. "You are Yates," she said, her voice rough but coherent. "I am," he confirmed, moving closer. "How do you feel?" "Weak," she admitted, "and thirsty." He helped her sit up slightly, supporting her back with pillows, and brought water to her lips. She drank gratefully, then fell back exhausted from even that small effort. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "This was not how I imagined our first meeting." "Do not apologize," Yates said, echoing his words from days before. "You are here. You are alive. That is what matters. How long have I been sick?" "4 days since you arrived. The doctor said you have pneumonia." Hannah closed her eyes, tears leaking from the corners. "I should have written to you, told you I was unwell, but I was afraid you would tell me not to come and I had nowhere else to go." "What do you mean?" Yates asked gently. She was quiet for a long moment, gathering her strength. "After my parents died, I tried to continue my seamstress work, but there was so much competition in Boston. I could barely afford my boarding house room. I started taking in laundry as well, working from dawn until midnight. But it was not enough. I was behind on rent, running out of food. When winter came, I became ill but could not afford to stop working or see a doctor." Her words came slowly, punctuated by pauses to catch her breath. Yates listened, his heart aching for what she had endured. "I recovered enough to work again, but I never fully regained my strength. Then the boarding house owner told me I had to leave if I could not pay. That is when I saw the advertisement, the one seeking mail-order brides for men out west. I knew I was not strong, but I thought perhaps the fresh air, the change would help. And your letters, they were so kind. I felt I could trust you." "You can trust me," Yates assured her, "but you should have told me the truth. I would have sent money for you to see a doctor before traveling." "I was ashamed," Hannah whispered. "I did not want you to think I was just seeking charity." "Rest now," Yates said, seeing how the conversation had exhausted her. "We can talk more later. You need to focus on getting well." Over the following days, Hannah slowly began to improve. Her appetite returned in small measures, and Yates made sure she ate as much as she could tolerate. He continued to prepare nourishing broths and added soft bread, eggs, and stewed apples. He helped her sit up for longer periods, supporting her when she was too weak to hold herself upright. They talked during these times, continuing the conversations they had begun through letters. Hannah told him more about her life in Boston, about her parents who had been educated and cultured but died penniless after her father's business partner disappeared with all their money. She spoke of her love for reading and how she had treasured the hours spent in the public library, her only escape from the harsh realities of her daily life. Yates shared his own story. He had come to California 8 years earlier, at the age of 20, drawn by tales of gold and opportunity. He had tried mining but found more satisfaction in honest ranching. His parents had both passed when he was young, his father to a riding accident and his mother to illness, and he had been mostly on his own since his 16th year. "I am not a wealthy man," he told Hannah honestly. "I make enough to live comfortably and I save what I can, but I cannot offer you luxury." "I do not want luxury," Hannah replied. "I want peace. I want a home. Then I will do my best to give you that." After a week, Hannah was strong enough to sit in the chair by the window, wrapped in blankets despite the mild September weather. She watched as Yates worked around the cabin, mending a harness, preparing meals, organizing supplies. She noticed how capable he was, how his large hands could be surprisingly gentle when needed. "You have been taking care of everything," she observed. "The ranch, the house, me. When do you rest?" "I rest enough," Yates said, though the dark circles under his eyes told a different story. "You need to sleep properly," Hannah insisted. "I have been in your bed for over a week. Where have you been sleeping?" "In the chair, mostly, sometimes on the floor." "That is not acceptable. Tonight you will sleep in your own bed. I can manage the chair. You are still recovering." "And I will never fully recover if I feel guilty about your exhaustion," Hannah said with a firmness that surprised them both. "Please, Yates, you have done so much for me. Let me at least give you back your bed." That night they compromised. Hannah insisted she was well enough to manage on a bedroll on the floor, but Yates refused to allow that. Instead, he fashioned a curtain down the middle of the room using a spare sheet, giving them each privacy. He took the bedroll, and Hannah remained in the bed. And though it was not a perfect solution, they both slept better than they had in days. As September gave way to October, Hannah continued to grow stronger. She began to move around the cabin more, first just a few steps at a time, then longer walks. Color returned to her cheeks, and her appetite improved dramatically. Yates was amazed at the transformation. The frail, fever-racked woman who had arrived nearly unconscious had slowly revealed herself to be someone quite different. Hannah had a quick mind and a dry sense of humor that caught Yates off guard. When he came in from the cattle one afternoon, covered in mud after pulling a calf from a ravine, she took one look at him and said, "I believe you have brought half the ranch inside with you." He looked down at himself and laughed, something he realized he had not done in a very long time. "I suppose I did." "Well, go back outside and leave the other half where it belongs," she teased. "I just swept these floors." She had indeed been keeping the cabin clean, insisting on helping despite Yates's protests that she should continue resting. He came to realize that Hannah needed to feel useful, that sitting idle made her anxious. So he allowed her to do small tasks, sweeping, preparing vegetables, mending his shirts with the sewing kit she had brought in her carpet bag. One evening, as they sat together eating supper, Hannah said, "I should write to the agency, let them know I arrived safely." Yates nodded slowly. "I suppose you should. They will want to know if we plan to marry." The question hung between them. They had not spoken directly about marriage since Hannah's arrival, the illness having pushed such discussions aside. Now, with Hannah recovering, the question could no longer be avoided. "What do you want?" Yates asked carefully. Hannah set down her fork and met his eyes. "I want to be honest with you. When I left Boston, I was desperate. I would have agreed to marry almost anyone if it meant survival. But now, after these weeks, I find myself hoping for something more than just survival." "What is that?" "A real partnership," she said. "I've come to respect you, Yates. The way you cared for me, asking nothing in return, expecting nothing. You could have sent me back on the first stagecoach after I arrived sick. Many men would have." "That thought never crossed my mind," Yates said truthfully. "I know. That is why I would like to stay if you will have me. But I think we should take time to know each other properly before we marry. Is that acceptable to you?" Relief and something warmer flooded through Yates. "More than acceptable. I find myself hoping for the same thing." They smiled at each other across the simple wooden table, and Yates felt something shift in his chest. Over the past weeks, he had been so focused on keeping Hannah alive that he had not allowed himself to truly see her as a woman, as a potential wife. Now, looking at her in the lamplight, seeing the intelligence and strength in her eyes, he felt the first stirrings of something beyond duty or obligation. As October deepened and the air grew crisp, Hannah became well enough to venture outside. Yates gave her a tour of his property, showing her the small herd of cattle, the vegetable garden that was finishing for the season, the chicken coop that housed 6 hens and a temperamental rooster. "It is not much," he said, somewhat apologetically. "It is wonderful," Hannah breathed, looking at the surrounding hills painted gold and amber by the autumn sun. "I cannot believe how beautiful it is here. In Boston, everything was gray, buildings and smoke and crowds. This is like a painting." They walked to the creek that formed the southern boundary of his property, and Hannah knelt to trail her fingers in the cool water. "I could be happy here," she said softly. "I hope you will be," Yates replied. She looked up at him, shielding her eyes against the sun. "Tell me about the town." I have been here for weeks and know nothing about it. Ukiah is small, Yates explained, helping her to her feet. Maybe 500 people, depending on how many miners are working the nearby hills. There is a general store, a church, a saloon, a blacksmith. Dr. Morrison you have met. The school teacher is Mrs. Patterson, a widow. The sheriff is Tom Brennan, good man, keeps things peaceful mostly. Are there other women? I mean, will I have friends? There are several ranch wives and women in town. People here are generally friendly, though everyone is busy with their own concerns. When you are well enough, we can go to Sunday service. That is when most folks socialize. The following Sunday, true to his word, Yates hitched up his wagon and drove Hannah into town. She had carefully washed and mended her best dress, a simple green cotton that matched her eyes, and pinned up her hair. She was still thinner than she should be, but she looked healthy and vibrant in a way that made Yates's heart skip. The small church was packed with ranchers, miners, and townspeople. Heads turned as Yates entered with Hannah, and he felt her hand tighten nervously on his arm. He patted her hand reassuringly and led her to a pew near the back. After the service, they were immediately surrounded. Everyone wanted to meet the mail-order bride, to hear her story, to offer advice and welcome. Hannah handled it with grace, smiling and answering questions politely despite clearly being overwhelmed. Mrs. Patterson, the schoolteacher, was particularly kind. She was a woman of perhaps 40 with graying hair and a warm smile. "You must come to tea," she insisted. "Any afternoon you can manage. I live above the schoolhouse." Several ranch wives also extended invitations, and by the time they returned to the wagon, Hannah looked exhausted but pleased. "That went well," Yates observed. "Everyone was so welcoming," Hannah said. "I had feared they might look down on me, a mail-order bride with no family or prospects." "People here do not care much about such things," Yates said. "They care more about character and hard work." As they drove home, Hannah was quiet, watching the landscape roll by. Finally, she said, "Yates, may I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Why did you never marry before? You are a good man with your own land. Surely there were women who would have been interested." Yates was silent for a moment, guiding the horses around a bend. "I suppose I was waiting for the right person. There are not many unmarried women out here, and the few I met, well, we did not suit. I am a quiet man. I like the work of the ranch, the solitude. Many women find that boring." "I do not find it boring," Hannah said. "I find it peaceful." He glanced at her and found her watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "I am glad," he said simply. November brought the first rains, turning the dusty landscape green almost overnight. Hannah was now fully recovered, strong enough to help with the daily work of the ranch. She took over the cooking entirely, freeing up time for Yates to finish preparations for winter. She also began working on improving the cabin, sewing curtains for the windows, braiding a rug from old fabric scraps, making the space feel more like a home. They fell into a comfortable routine, working side by side during the day and spending evenings together by the fire. Yates taught Hannah how to milk the cow he had recently purchased, and she taught him how to make proper bread, light and fluffy instead of the dense bricks he had been baking. They talked endlessly, discovering shared opinions on everything from politics to poetry. They disagreed sometimes too, and Yates found he enjoyed these debates. Hannah was not afraid to speak her mind, and she challenged him in ways that made him think differently about the world. One rainy evening, as they sat by the fire, Hannah reading aloud from a book borrowed from Mrs. Patterson while Yates repaired a saddle, he realized with startling clarity that he was falling in love with her. It was not a sudden passion, not the dramatic romance described in books. Instead, it was a quiet, steady certainty that grew from spending days together, from learning her habits and quirks, from watching her laugh at his terrible jokes, and seeing her determination as she mastered new skills. He loved the way she hummed while cooking, the way she worried her lower lip when concentrating on needlework, the way she always checked on the animals before bed to make sure they were settled. He wanted to tell her, but fear held him back. What if she did not feel the same? She had said she respected him, but respect was not love. She had agreed to stay and get to know him, but that did not mean she wanted his heart. Hannah, unaware of his internal struggle, continued reading, her voice filling the cabin with words about far-off places and grand adventures. Yates listened, but mostly he watched her, memorizing the planes of her face in the firelight. The opportunity to express his feelings came unexpectedly one afternoon in mid-November. Yates had ridden out to check the northern fence line, and his horse stepped in a hole, stumbling badly. Yates was thrown clear, but his shoulder took the brunt of the impact, and he returned to the cabin in pain, clutching his left arm. Hannah took one look at him and immediately took charge. "Sit down," she commanded, helping him into the chair. She carefully examined his shoulder, her fingers gentle but thorough. "I do not think anything is broken, but you have definitely injured it badly. You need to rest it." "I cannot rest," Yates protested. "There is too much work." "The work can wait, or I can do it," Hannah said firmly. "You are not going to make this worse by being stubborn." Over the next few days, Hannah insisted on doing all the heavy work. She tended the cattle, feeding and watering them. She chopped wood for the fire, carried water from the well, and kept the cabin running smoothly. Yates watched, frustrated by his injury but deeply moved by her determination to care for him as he had cared for her. "You do not have to do all this," he said one evening as she came in from the barn, her cheeks flushed from cold and exertion. "Yes, I do," Hannah replied, removing her coat. "You took care of me when I was helpless. Let me return the favor." "It is not the same. You were deathly ill. I just wrenched my shoulder." Hannah came to sit beside him, her expression serious. "It is exactly the same. We take care of each other. That is what partners do, is it not?" "Is that what we are?" Yates asked quietly. "Partners? I hope so," Hannah said. "I have been thinking about what I said before about taking time to know each other. I believe we have done that. I know you now, Yates. I know you are kind and patient and steady. I know you work hard and care deeply about doing things right. I know you read the same passage from your poetry book 3 times because you like the way the words sound. I know you always check the animals twice before bed because you worry. I know you, and I care for you very much." Yates's heart was pounding. "How much is very much?" Hannah took his right hand in both of hers, her green eyes steady on his. "Enough that I would like to marry you, truly marry you, not just because I needed security, but because I want to spend my life with you, if you still want me." "If I still want you," Yates repeated, almost laughing. "Hannah, I have been half in love with you since you insisted I take my bed back. I have been fully in love with you since you argued with me about the best way to season stew. I want nothing more than to marry you." The smile that spread across Hannah's face was like sunrise. "Then why did you not say anything?" "I was afraid you only saw me as a benefactor, someone who helped you when you needed it." "You are so much more than that," Hannah said softly. She leaned forward and kissed him gently, tentatively. Yates responded, his right hand coming up to cup her face, his injured shoulder forgotten for the moment. When they parted, both were breathless and smiling. "We should get married soon," Yates said. "I do not want to wait any longer." "Neither do I," Hannah agreed. "But there is something I need to tell you first, something I should have mentioned in my letters but did not." Yates felt a flicker of concern. "What is it?" Hannah took a deep breath. "I cannot promise you children. Before I left Boston, when I was very ill, The doctor told me there was a chance the illness had damaged my body in ways that might make conceiving difficult or impossible. I do not know for certain, but I need you to know this possibility before we marry. If having children is important to you, I will understand if you want to reconsider." Yates was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. Then he said, "Hannah, look at me." When she met his eyes, he continued, "I would love to have children with you if it happens. But if it does not, that does not change how I feel. I want you, not some imaginary future family, just you." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes. "You mean that?" "With all my heart." She kissed him again, and this time there was no tentativeness, only joy and relief and love. They were married 3 weeks later, on a cold December morning, in the small church with most of the town in attendance. Hannah wore a new dress she had sewn herself from fabric Yates had bought at the general store, a deep blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes. Yates wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed, his hair neatly trimmed. Dr. Morrison gave Hannah away, having become something of a protective figure to her after her illness. Mrs. Patterson cried happily throughout the ceremony. Sheriff Brennan stood as Yates's witness, clapping him on the back afterward with a broad grin. The townspeople had prepared a celebration at the church hall, with food and music. It was nothing fancy, but it was filled with warmth and genuine goodwill. Hannah danced with Yates, laughing as he admitted he was terrible at dancing and promptly proved it by stepping on her toes. "I do not care," she said, holding him close. "I am happier than I ever thought possible." "So am I," Yates murmured into her hair. They stayed until evening, then drove home through the winter darkness, bundled together against the cold. When they reached the cabin, Yates carried Hannah over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition. That night, they came together as husband and wife, discovering each other with tenderness and growing passion. Yates was gentle, always mindful of Hannah's recent illness, but she showed no hesitation, no fear. They loved each other fully, completely, and fell asleep tangled together, happier than either had ever been. The winter that followed was harsh, with heavy rains and occasional snow, but inside the cabin, warmth reigned. Yates and Hannah settled into married life with surprising ease. They worked together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs, supporting each other through challenges. Hannah proved to be an excellent ranch wife. She managed the household efficiently, made their limited resources stretch impressively far, and was not afraid of hard work. She learned to ride, hesitantly at first but with growing confidence, so she could help move the cattle when needed. She started a larger garden plot, planning for spring planting. She befriended the neighboring ranch wives, and they shared knowledge about preserving food and managing livestock. Yates, for his part, showed Hannah daily how much he cherished her. He surprised her with small gifts, a pretty stone from the creek, a book he had ridden into Sacramento to buy, a wooden box he carved for her sewing supplies. He listened when she talked about her dreams and ideas. He made her laugh with his dry humor. He held her every night, making her feel safe and loved. In late January, Hannah became ill again, though not seriously. It was just a cold, but both of them panicked, remembering her arrival. Dr. Morrison came and assured them it was nothing to worry about, that her body was strong now and well able to fight off minor illnesses. "You did a good job nursing her back to health," the doctor told Yates. "She is a different woman from the one who arrived on that stagecoach." After the doctor left, Hannah wrapped her arms around Yates. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for not giving up on me." "Never," Yates promised. "You are my life now, Hannah. I will never give up on you." As winter slowly gave way to spring, Hannah began to notice changes in her body. At first, she dismissed them, thinking it was simply the result of finally eating regularly and living without constant stress. But when her monthly courses failed to arrive and she began feeling nauseous in the mornings, she allowed herself to hope. She said nothing to Yates at first, afraid of disappointing him if she was wrong. But as the signs continued, she finally rode into town alone one afternoon and asked to speak with Dr. Morrison privately. The examination was thorough, and when it was done, the doctor smiled at her. "Mrs. Kincaid, you are with child. About 2 months along, I would estimate." Hannah sat down abruptly, her hand going to her stomach. "But I was told it might not be possible." "Doctors do not know everything," Morrison said kindly. "Bodies heal in ways we do not always understand. You are healthy now, well-nourished, happy. Sometimes that makes all the difference." Tears streamed down Hannah's face. "I am going to have a baby." "You are. Now you need to take care of yourself. No heavy lifting, plenty of rest, good food, and tell that husband of yours. He deserves to know he is going to be a father." Hannah rode home in a daze, her mind spinning with the news. She found Yates in the barn, mending a stall door, and simply stood watching him for a moment. This man who had saved her life, who had shown her patience and kindness and love, was going to be the father of her child. "Yates," she said softly. He turned, immediately sensing something significant in her tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am more than all right," Hannah said, moving into his arms. "I went to see Dr. Morrison today." She felt Yates tense, fear evident in his quick intake of breath. "Are you sick again?" "No," she said, looking up at him with a radiant smile. "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Yates simply stared at her, unable to process the words. Then his face transformed, wonder and joy spreading across his features. "A baby," he repeated. "Truly, truly," Hannah confirmed. "In about 7 months." Yates let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses and swept Hannah into a careful embrace, spinning her around before setting her down gently. "I cannot believe it. You said it might not happen." "I know. The doctor said bodies heal in unexpected ways. He said being healthy and happy made a difference." "Then I will make sure you stay healthy and happy," Yates declared. "You are not lifting anything heavy. You are resting whenever you need to. You are eating the best food I can provide." Hannah laughed. "I am pregnant, not dying. I can still work." "But you do not have to work as hard," Yates insisted. "Let me take care of you." "We take care of each other," Hannah reminded him. "That is what partners do." The months that followed were among the happiest of their lives. As Hannah's belly grew, so did their joy and anticipation. Yates became almost comically protective, insisting on doing tasks Hannah had been managing for months. She tolerated his hovering with good humor, understanding it came from love. The ranch women rallied around Hannah, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Mrs. Patterson organized a quilting bee, and the women created a beautiful quilt for the baby. Even the men of the town showed their support, with several helping Yates build a cradle and add a small addition to the cabin that would serve as a nursery. In September, almost exactly 1 year after Hannah had arrived in Ukiah more dead than alive, she went into labor. Dr. Morrison was summoned, and Mrs. Patterson came to assist. Yates was banished to wait outside, and he paced frantically, listening to Hannah's cries and feeling helpless. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. More than once, Yates heard the doctor's concerned murmurs and felt terror grip his heart. He prayed harder than he ever had, bargaining with God to keep both Hannah and the baby safe. Finally, as the sun climbed toward noon, he heard a new sound, a thin, reedy wail. He stopped pacing, his heart in his throat, waiting for someone to tell him what had happened. Mrs. Patterson emerged, her face tired but smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Kincaid. You have a son, and your wife is well, exhausted but well." Yates nearly collapsed with relief. "Can I see them?" "Give the doctor a few more minutes to finish up. Then yes." When he was finally allowed in, Yates found Hannah propped up in bed, pale and clearly exhausted, but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in the quilt the town women had made. He approached slowly, almost reverently. "Meet your son," Hannah said softly. Yates looked down at the tiny red face, the miniature fingers curled into fists, the shock of dark hair. "He is perfect," he breathed. "Hold him," Hannah urged, carefully, terrified he might drop or hurt the fragile infant. Yates took his son into his arms. The baby opened his eyes, unfocused and dark, and Yates felt something fundamental shift in his soul. This was his child, his and Hannah's, a new life they had created together. "What should we name him?" Hannah asked. They had discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son, Yates knew. "I would like to name him Henry after my father, Henry James Kincaid." "Henry," Hannah repeated, smiling. "I like it. Henry it is." The first weeks with a newborn were challenging. Henry was a healthy baby but demanding, waking frequently to nurse, and seeming to have his days and nights confused. Hannah was recovering from the birth, and Yates tried to help as much as he could, though there was little he could do when the baby needed to feed. They stumbled through together, learning as they went. Hannah's natural maternal instincts kicked in, and she handled Henry with growing confidence. Yates discovered he had a talent for soothing the baby, walking the floor with Henry against his shoulder in the early morning hours, humming tunelessly until the baby fell back asleep. The town women continued to help, bringing food and offering advice. Dr. Morrison checked on them regularly, ensuring both Hannah and Henry were thriving. Slowly, they found their rhythm as a family. By the time Henry was 3 months old, things had settled considerably. He was sleeping for longer stretches at night, his little personality starting to emerge. He smiled readily, especially at Hannah, and seemed fascinated by everything around him. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Henry sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Hannah said, "Can you believe it has been over a year since I arrived?" "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Yates said. "I remember seeing you in that stagecoach, so pale and sick, and being terrified I was going to lose you before I even knew you." "I remember very little of those first days," Hannah admitted. "Mostly just fever dreams and the sound of your voice. You kept reading to me and I held onto that sound like a lifeline." "I am glad you held on." Hannah looked at him, love shining in her eyes. "So am I. I came here expecting survival, maybe companionship if I was lucky. I never imagined I would find this, a true partner, a home, a family." "You gave me everything, Yates." "You gave me everything too," Yates said, reaching for her hand. "Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions of life. You made me truly live again." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching their son sleep. Outside, the California hills were golden in the autumn sunset, and the cattle were settled for the night. Inside, the cabin was warm and filled with the quiet contentment of a family at peace. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. The ranch prospered as Yates worked hard and made smart decisions. Hannah's garden flourished, providing vegetables they could eat fresh in summer and preserve for winter. They added chickens and pigs, slowly building up their homestead. Henry grew into a bright, energetic boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's steady temperament. When he was 2 years old, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again, much to their delight and surprise. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she delivered a healthy baby girl they named Helen Marie after Hannah's mother, with 2 young children, Life became busier but richer. Henry adored his little sister, always trying to help take care of her. Helen was a happy baby who grew into a spirited toddler, keeping everyone on their toes. Yates expanded his herd and bought additional land, building the ranch into a solid, profitable operation. Hannah continued to manage their household with skill, and she also began taking in occasional sewing work, creating beautiful garments for the townspeople. Her reputation for fine needlework spread, and she often had more requests than she could manage. They became pillars of the small community. Yates served as a deacon at the church and helped settle disputes between neighbors. Hannah organized charitable efforts, collecting food and clothing for families in need. They hosted gatherings at their ranch, their home becoming known as a place of warmth and welcome. Through it all, their love for each other only deepened. They continued to work as partners, making decisions together, supporting each other through difficult times, celebrating victories together. They still talked every evening, sharing their days, their hopes, their concerns. They still laughed together, still held each other close at night, still looked at each other with the wonder of people who knew how fortunate they were. When Henry was 5 and Helen 3, Hannah became pregnant once more. This pregnancy was unexpected and difficult, with Hannah suffering from persistent nausea and fatigue. Yates insisted she rest more, hiring a young woman from town to help with the children and household tasks. In the spring, Hannah delivered twin boys, identical and tiny but healthy. They named them Luke and Levi, and suddenly the cabin was overflowing with children. The addition Yates had built years earlier was expanded again, creating more sleeping space. Life with 4 children under 6 was chaotic and exhausting, but also filled with laughter and love. Henry, now the responsible oldest, helped watch his younger siblings. Helen was a nurturing big sister to the twins. Yates and Hannah worked together seamlessly, dividing tasks and supporting each other through the demanding days. One evening, after finally getting all 4 children to sleep, Hannah sank into a chair with an exhausted sigh. "I think we should stop having babies now," she said, only half joking. Yates, equally tired, chuckled. "I think that is a wise decision. 4 is a good number." "A good, chaotic, exhausting, wonderful number," Hannah amended. She looked around the cabin, at the toys scattered across the floor, the drawings Helen had made pinned to the wall, the cradles holding the sleeping twins. "This is not at all what I imagined when I left Boston." "Is that good or bad?" Yates asked. "It is perfect," Hannah said simply. "I was drowning in Boston, literally dying. I came here hoping only to survive, to find a safe place to exist. Instead, I found life, real abundant life. I found love and purpose and joy. I found you." Yates crossed to her and pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her. "I found you too. The best thing I ever did was place that advertisement for a mail-order bride. The best thing I ever did was answer it, despite being too sick and poor to make the journey safely." "I am glad you are neither sick nor poor anymore," Hannah laughed. "Well, we are not rich, but we have everything we need." "Everything and more," Yates agreed. As the children grew, the ranch continued to prosper. Yates was able to hire help, taking some of the burden off himself and allowing more time with his family. He taught Henry to ride and rope, passing on the skills of ranching. Hannah taught Helen to sew and cook, though Helen showed more interest in following her father and older brother around the ranch than in domestic tasks. The twins were a handful, full of mischief and energy, but they were also deeply bonded, seeming to communicate in their own private language. They kept everyone entertained and occasionally exasperated. When Henry turned 10, Yates decided it was time to make their ranch official. He filed the necessary papers, and their property was registered as the Kincaid Ranch. He had a sign made, and the whole family went out to watch as it was mounted at the entrance to their property. Hannah stood with Yates, holding his hand as they looked at the sign. Behind them, their 4 children played, their laughter carrying on the breeze. "We built something real," Hannah said softly. "We did," Yates agreed. "Together." That evening, after the children were in bed, Yates gave Hannah a gift. It was a small wooden box beautifully carved with flowers and vines. Inside was a folded piece of paper. "What is this?" Hannah asked, unfolding it carefully. "The deed to the ranch," Yates said. "I had it changed. It is in both our names now. This ranch belongs to both of us, equal partners." Hannah looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Yates, you did not have to do this." "Yes, I did. You have worked as hard as I have to build this place. Your name should be on the deed. Besides," he added with a smile, "you are the one who really runs things anyway." Hannah laughed through her tears and kissed him. "I love you so much. I love you too. From the moment I saw you in that stagecoach, sick and barely conscious, I felt something. I did not know then it would become this, but I am grateful every day that it did." The years continued to pass, bringing the inevitable mix of joy and sorrow that makes up a life. When the twins were 6, Dr. Morrison passed away in his sleep, and the whole town mourned the loss of their dedicated physician. A younger doctor eventually arrived to take his place, but Morrison was deeply missed. Mrs. Patterson retired from teaching when arthritis made holding a chalk too painful. Helen, at 12 years old, surprised everyone by expressing interest in becoming a teacher herself. Hannah and Yates encouraged her, making sure she continued her education and helping her develop the skills she would need. Henry, at 15, was already a skilled rancher, working alongside his father with the confidence of someone much older. He had started courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sweet girl named Sarah, and Yates suspected he would be gaining a daughter-in-law in a few years. The twins, 10 years old and still inseparable, were showing interest in different directions. Luke loved working with the horses and had a natural gift for training them. Levi, on the other hand, was fascinated by building things and spent hours helping repair fences, gates, and buildings. One autumn evening, almost 15 years after Hannah's arrival, she and Yates rode out alone to watch the sunset from a hill overlooking their ranch. It was a rare moment of quiet, with the children old enough to manage on their own for a few hours. They sat together on a blanket, Yates's arm around Hannah's shoulders, watching the sky turn gold and orange and purple. Below them, they could see their home, smoke rising from the chimney, lights glowing in the windows. The cattle were dark shapes on the hills, and they could just make out the figures of their children moving around the property. 15 years, Hannah said wonderingly. I arrived dying, and look at us now. You are the strongest person I know, Yates said. You fought your way back from the edge of death, built a new life in a place you had never seen, raised 4 children and helped build this ranch. You are extraordinary. I had help, Hannah said, smiling at him. A cowboy who refused to let me give up, who nursed me back to health, who loved me when I had nothing to offer. You had everything to offer, Yates corrected. You just did not know it yet. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon. Finally, Hannah said, Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not answered your advertisement? If I had stayed in Boston, you would have died, Yates said bluntly. And I would have stayed lonely, probably eventually married someone suitable but never found what we have. Fate, Hannah said, or luck, or providence. Whatever you want to call it, I am grateful, so am I. As darkness fell, they rode back down to their home where their children waited. Henry had started a fire in the hearth and Helen had prepared supper. The twins were setting the table, arguing good-naturedly about something as usual. It was a scene of domestic harmony that filled both Yates and Hannah with deep satisfaction. Over the next few years, changes continued. Henry married Sarah in a beautiful ceremony at the church, and they moved into a small house on the far edge of the ranch property. A year later, they had a son, making Yates and Hannah grandparents for the first time. Holding his grandson, Yates felt the same overwhelming love he had felt when holding his own children. Helen, at 16, began teaching at the local school under the supervision of the new schoolteacher, preparing for the day when she could take over the position full-time. She proved to be a natural educator, patient and creative. The twins, at 14, were developing distinct personalities despite their identical appearance. Luke was quieter, more introspective, while Levi was outgoing and always ready with a joke. But they remained each other's best friend, working together on ranch projects and supporting each other through challenges. As Yates approached his mid-40s and Hannah her late 30s, they began to slow down slightly, letting their children and hired hands take on more of the physical labor. They had built something lasting, something they could be proud of, and now they could enjoy the fruits of their years of hard work. One spring morning, Hannah came out to find Yates standing by the fence, looking out over their land. She joined him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything," Yates said. "How far we have come. How that terrified young woman who arrived sick and desperate became the strong, confident woman standing beside me. How this small cabin and 20 acres became a thriving ranch with a second generation already starting their lives. You have any regrets?" Yates turned to look at her fully, seeing the threads of silver in her blonde hair, the lines around her eyes from years of smiling, the capable strength in her frame. "Not a single one. Best decision I ever made was placing that advertisement. Second best was not sending you back when you arrived more dead than alive." Hannah laughed. "I am glad you are stubborn. I am glad you are strong." They stood together in the morning sun, partners in every sense of the word, their love having only deepened and matured over the years. Behind them, their children and grandchild represented the future they had built together. Around them, the ranch they had carved from raw land stood as testament to their hard work and dedication. More years passed in the steady rhythm of ranch life. Henry and Sarah had 2 more children, daughters this time. Helen married a young rancher from the next county and moved away, though she visited often. The twins both eventually married as well, Luke to a quiet woman who loved horses as much as he did, and Levi to a vivacious woman who matched his energy perfectly. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, becoming one of the most successful in the region. Yates taught his sons and sons-in-law everything he knew, preparing them to eventually take over operations. Hannah, now a grandmother several times over, spent her days overseeing the household, doing fine needlework, and spoiling her grandchildren. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Yates arranged for the children to watch the grandchildren so he could take Hannah into San Francisco for a week. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch together since their honeymoon trip to Sacramento 20 years earlier. In the city, they stayed in a nice hotel, ate in restaurants, and walked along the waterfront. Hannah bought fabric for new dresses, and Yates bought her a beautiful necklace with a green stone that matched her eyes. They attended a play at a real theater and danced in a proper ballroom. On their last evening, walking along the bay as the sun set, Hannah said, "This has been wonderful, but I cannot wait to get home." Yates laughed. "I feel the same way. The city is exciting, but it is not where we belong." We belong at the ranch with our family, with the land we have worked so hard for. We belong together, Yates said. Everything else is just details. Hannah stopped walking and turned to face him. Despite being in her early 40s now, despite the years of hard work and childbearing, she was still beautiful to him, perhaps more so because he knew her so completely. "I love you," she said simply. "More now than even on our wedding day. Every year, every challenge, every joy, every ordinary day has added layers to my love for you. You are my best friend, my partner, the love of my life." Yates pulled her close, not caring that they were standing in public, that people were walking by and watching. "You are my everything, Hannah. You came to me broken and desperate, and you gave me purpose and joy and a family. You made me whole." They kissed there on the waterfront as the sun set behind them. Two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, who had built a life together from almost nothing, who loved each other with a depth and constancy that was rare and precious. When they returned to the ranch, their family was waiting, grandchildren running to greet them, children wanting to hear about their trip. The house was full of noise and laughter and life, everything Yates and Hannah had dreamed of during those early difficult days. As the years continued, Yates and Hannah gradually transitioned into the role of elder statesmen of the ranch. Henry took over daily operations, managing the cattle and the business aspects with skill. Luke ran the horse breeding program, which had become quite successful. Levy had expanded the ranch buildings and was always working on improvements. Helen, though living elsewhere, remained involved in family decisions and visited often with her growing family. Yates and Hannah spent their days overseeing everything from a comfortable distance, offering advice when asked, but trusting their children to make their own decisions. They had time now to simply enjoy each other's company, to take long rides through their property, to sit on the porch in the evenings and watch grandchildren play. When Yates turned 50 and Hannah 45, they threw a large celebration, inviting everyone from miles around. The ranch had a reputation now as a gathering place, and dozens of people came to celebrate with them. There was food and music and dancing, and as Yates held Hannah in his arms, swaying to a fiddle tune under the stars, he reflected on how blessed his life had been. "Do you remember the first time we danced?" he asked. "At our wedding reception when I stepped all over your feet," Hannah laughed. "You have improved considerably since then. I have had a lot of practice." 25 years of practice," Hannah said, shaking her head in wonder. "A quarter of a century since I arrived on that stagecoach, barely alive. Sometimes it feels impossible that so much time has passed. Has it been what you hoped for?" "It has been so much more than I ever dared to hope for," Hannah said honestly. "When I answered your advertisement, I hoped for safety and maybe kindness. I got love, partnership, a family, a home, a whole life beyond my wildest dreams." As they danced, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, by friends and neighbors, by the ranch they had built together, both Yates and Hannah felt profound gratitude. Their story had started with desperation and illness, with fear and uncertainty. But through commitment, hard work, and deep love, it had become something beautiful and lasting. The music swirled around them and they held each other close. Two souls who had found their perfect match, who had weathered every storm together, who had built something that would last for generations. The mail-order bride who had arrived sick and weak had become strong and confident. The lonely cowboy who had placed an advertisement seeking companionship had found the love of his life. In the years that followed, they continued to thrive. Grandchildren grew, and some had children of their own, making Yates and Hannah great-grandparents. The ranch continued to prosper, with the third generation now learning the ropes. Yates and Hannah aged gracefully, their health remaining good, their minds sharp, their love for each other unwavering. They spent their later years doing the things they loved, riding through their property, tending a smaller garden, spending time with family, and simply being together. They had built a legacy not just of land and cattle, but of love and family, of partnership and commitment. When Yates was in his 60s and Hannah her late 50s, they took another trip to San Francisco, wanting to see the city one more time while they still could. It had changed dramatically since their first visit, but they enjoyed exploring it together, holding hands like young lovers. On the last night of that trip, lying in bed at their hotel, Hannah said, "I have been thinking about writing down our story for the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, so they know how it all started." "That is a good idea," Yates said. "Though you should probably leave out the part where you arrived looking like death." Hannah swatted his arm playfully. "That is the most important part. It shows that even when things seem hopeless, they can turn around, that love can flourish even in the most unlikely circumstances." "Then you should definitely include it," Yates agreed. "Our story is worth telling." So Hannah began writing, filling pages with memories of that desperate journey west, of waking to find a stranger caring for her with such gentleness, of learning to love and be loved, of building a life from almost nothing. She wrote of challenges and triumphs, of children and grandchildren, of ordinary days that were extraordinary because they were filled with love. When she finished, she read it aloud to Yates, and he listened with tears in his eyes, remembering every moment she described. They bound the pages together carefully and placed the manuscript in a special box, along with the first letters they had exchanged, their marriage certificate, and other precious mementos. "This is our legacy," Hannah said, holding the box. "Not just the ranch or the family, but this story of love and perseverance." "It is a good story," Yates said, pulling her close. "The best one I know." They lived into their 70s, blessed with good health and surrounded by family. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of their children and grandchildren, the Kincaid name respected throughout the region. When they went to town, people greeted them warmly, remembering their kindness and generosity over the decades. On a warm summer evening, when Yates was 73 and Hannah 68, they sat together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the hills gold. Their hands were clasped, as they had been countless times over nearly 50 years of marriage. Around them, great-grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter a sweet sound on the breeze. "I could not have asked for a better life," Yates said softly. "Every day with you has been a gift. Even that first day when I arrived barely conscious and probably looking terrifying." Hannah teased. "Especially that day," Yates said seriously, "because that was the day my real life began. Everything before you was just preparation." Hannah leaned her head on his shoulder, content beyond measure. "I was so afraid when I got on that stagecoach in Boston. I thought I might be traveling to my death. In a way, I was. The frightened, desperate woman who made that journey did die, and in her place I became someone new, someone strong and loved and happy." "You were always strong," Yates corrected. "You just needed the chance to show it." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped lower, the sky turning from gold to orange to purple. Behind them, through the open door, they could hear their family inside the house, preparing supper, talking and laughing. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and peaceful, a testament to their decades of hard work. "Do you think the grandchildren will keep the ranch going?" Hannah asked. "I know they will," Yates said confidently. "We taught them well. They understand the value of this land, of family, of working together. The Kincaid Ranch will be here for many generations." "I like that," Hannah said. knowing that what we built will continue long after we are gone. As darkness fell and stars began to appear overhead, they remained on the porch, reluctant to go inside and break the peaceful spell. They had shared thousands of evenings like this over the years, but each one was precious, a reminder of how fortunate they had been to find each other. Finally, as the night grew cool, they rose and went inside where their family waited. They ate supper together, all 3 generations present, the table laden with food from the ranch and garden. There was laughter and conversation, arguments and jokes, the comfortable chaos of a large family gathered together. Later, after everyone had gone to their respective homes or to bed, Yates and Hannah prepared for sleep. They had shared a bed for nearly 50 years, and the ritual of preparing for the night was deeply familiar and comforting. They moved around each other easily, a lifetime of practice making every movement natural. In bed, Hannah curled against Yates's side, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her. "Good night, my love," she murmured. "Good night, my heart," Yates replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. They fell asleep as they had thousands of times before, together, content, deeply in love. The mail-order bride and the caring cowboy, who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life of meaning and purpose, who had loved each other through every season and circumstance. Their story was one of transformation, of healing, of love that grew and deepened with time. It was a story of partnership and perseverance, of building something lasting from humble beginnings. It was, in the end, a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the wild California hills in the late 19th century. The Kincaid Ranch would continue for many generations, and the story of Yates and Hannah would be passed down, told and retold to children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It would become a family legend, the tale of how their family began, of the woman who arrived nearly dead and the man who saved her, and how their love created something that would endure long after they were gone. And in the California hills, under endless skies, the ranch they built together stood as a monument to their love, their dedication, and their unshakable commitment to each other, and to the life they had created together. It was a happy ending, well-earned and deeply satisfying, the culmination of a journey that had begun with desperation and ended with joy.